From Santa Cruz, California, I'm Gary Shapiro, and this is From the Bookshelf. Thanks so much for joining me. Howard Yaruss is my guest. He's an economist, professor, an attorney, and the author of Understandable Economics, because understanding our economy is easier than you think and more important than you know. Howard Yaruss, welcome to From the Bookshelf.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Most people, when they're in middle school, I guess, they're like science and math people, or they are English and social studies people. I'm sort of like the English social studies person, and I never took any math classes above arithmetic. And so I don't know anything about those things. But you apparently have defied this because you are a writer who wrote a very understandable, even breezy book about what seems to me a mathematical subject. So how did you do that? Which were you? What kind of a middle school kid were you?
I have so much to say on this. I actually was the more math science type, and then chose to go into law and economics, which was not my forte. But the point I desperately want to make, and what this book is all dedicated to, is economics is not like physics. It's not like math. It's not like biology. It's a social science. It's a discipline for figuring out who gets what in our society and who does what in our society. And if people think, oh, I'll just cede the economic decisions to the quote unquote experts, to the economists, they may wind up with policies that they really don't like. It's about values. It's about judgments. Economists use math, and I just want to be clear about this, to tease out fine relationships, to tease out subtle differences in relationships between two things. But you don't need math. In fact, math can impair your understanding if you just want to understand the basic relationships. That's the audience I wrote the book for. You're exactly the kind of person I wrote the book for. And I know I'm very passionate about this. It's so important people understand that, because otherwise they're going to cede it to people who are making decisions for them, and the outcome of those decisions are going to be really bad. You need to get involved in these decisions. You just can't write them off.
All right. So I know that you tried very hard to stay objective in your writing with regard to politics, and you state this many times in your book. But I would say that Understandable Economics, the book that you have written, is a fact-based work, and therefore facts have a liberal bias.
That's a very funny line. I wouldn't call them liberal. I'll tell you something very interesting. Before 7 or 8 years ago, I sometimes asked the class after the semester if I was a Democrat or Republican, and they couldn't tell. Now, I like to attribute it to my being impartial. It probably was that they weren't paying any attention. But
yes, that's probably.
Let me engage in my fantasies. That said, things have changed considerably since then. There is a real threat to our democracy, and the separation of powers seems to be breaking down. But do facts have a liberal bias? I don't think liberals have a monopoly on truth. I think conservatives have a lot of claim to legitimacy as well. But what is going on right now is anything but conservative. I opened the book. The first line of the book is, and pardon me if I
read it for us. Yes,
what do Helen Keller,
right away.
Adolf Hitler, Oscar Wilde, Joseph Stalin, and Nelson Mandela all have in common? And the next sentence is they all call themselves socialists. I rest my case. These words have no meaning. Trump is radically changing our government, and the New York Times refers to him as a conservative. I feel like springing for a dictionary and giving it to them.
Well, that brings me to my next question, which is, you wrote this book, and I know you took some time to write it because you talk about how during the pandemic you changed the title of it and things like that. So how much of it has changed just in the last 6 months or 7 months since second President Trump term has begun? Everything seems very different now.
Yeah, it sure does. For instance, tariffs. We'll talk about tariffs. People hear tax policy or tariffs and their eyes glaze over. Let's try not to do it here. I'll try to be as entertaining as possible. What are tariffs? 3 words: tax on imports. It's a sales tax on imports. If you read the Constitution, Congress has the authority to tax. Doesn't say anywhere about the president having authority to tax. I'm not alone in this regard. The trade court, as well as the United States Court of Appeals, agree with me on this. He has no authority to do this. So what's the point? The point is that this is unprecedented in U.S. history. There's no precedent for this, really.
Well, if I were to say, from now on, there will be a tax on all goods coming from Japan, nobody would pay any attention to me because I don't have the legal right to impose any kind of a tariff. But if President Trump doesn't have a legal right to do it, why does it happen? Why does it occur if he doesn't have the legal right to make it occur?
Well, anything illegal can happen if it's not challenged. There was a challenge to the tariffs, and the trade court appropriately held that they're totally illegal. But for reasons I don't fully understand, I think that there's a concern with courts causing too much havoc in the economy. They said the tariffs can stay in place until the higher court hears the case on appeal. The higher court heard the case on appeal, and to their credit, they said October 14th, 2025, they come to an end. We'll see what happens.
Okay.
You know, it's interesting that I'm shrugging my shoulders because usually when an appellate court says something happens on such and such a date, it happens. We'll see.
Okay. We're talking with Howard Yaruss, and he's the author of a book called Understandable Economics, because understanding our economy is easier than you think and more important than you know. It's a wonderful book, and I understand it's being turned into a musical on Broadway, and I might just that
along with Springtime Peddler in Germany.
That's right. But let's go back to the beginning of your story and see if you can clarify for me money. Why is there money? I mean, it is kind of a crazy thing that we just say, okay, this is what it's worth. I mean, why is anything worth anything, and why do we accept money?
This is so fascinating, and that's what I tried to bring through in the book. Economics is not some mathematical, technical subject that you need to see to quote-unquote experts. It's a fascinating subject. How did money is something that most people in their lives give some thought to. It's something that has some influence on people's lives, and I'm trying to. It's hyperbolic understatement. What is money? Well, I talk about the 4 stages of money. The first stage, and I just think it's worth a 1-minute diversion. Lasted for millennia. It's in the Bible. Gold and silver, precious metals. That lasted a really long time, even though it was not particularly efficient. You know, how do you carry the stuff around? How do you know it's pure? The second chapter is commodity-backed money, money backed by gold. And that came to an end in 1973 in the United States. That's in my lifetime. And now we're in the third stage of money, and that's called fiat money. Fiat money simply means money just made up by the government out of thin air. When they print it, there's nothing backing it. It's just paper with fancy green writing on it. And the chapter 4 is yet to be written, whether virtual currencies or cryptocurrencies or some kind of currency that the tech people concoct out of thin air takes a hit out of the roll on money. But for our purposes today, the U.S. dollar is money in the United States. Every country has its own money, and that's what money is. And it's something that's just made up by the government. Why? It facilitates commerce. If we didn't have money, I couldn't go down to my supermarket and give them a few of these books and they give me some food. It just wouldn't work. So money really facilitates commerce, and I think it's arguably one of the greatest inventions in the history of mankind.
But you distinguish money from cash. That is, if there's cash in a box at the vault of the place, that's not money. It has to be money.
No,
it's money.
Cash in your wallet is money.
Right.
I just want to be really clear about this. Money has a generally accepted definition. It's currency in circulation. In other words, cash in your wallet, anything you can spend, and checking account balances. Because you could have debit cards, you can go around spending it. A treasury bond is not money. The test for money is really simple. Go out of your office down to the corner and try to buy a sandwich. Anything they'll accept is money, pretty much. And they'll accept a debit card. They'll accept cash. You might say they'll accept a credit card, but that's not money because all that is a short-term loan, if you think about it, to be paid for within a month with money, or if you like paying interest sometime later than a month. But money pretty much is defined as anything that you can easily buy stuff with. And that's currency and checking account balances. The reason for the confusion is when the government prints currency, I almost fell into the trap myself. When the government prints currency, it's just sitting there in a vault. That's not really money because no one can spend it. It's only when it gets out and about, what business people call out in circulation, that those green slips of paper become money. But yes, if it's sitting in your wallet, no matter how it got there, legally or illegally, it's definitely money.
Yeah. So the money that's sitting in the mint is not money until they put it into a bag and carry it out to the armored car. As they go by the doorway, it turns into money.
Yes, because it's going to some bank's account, and the bank then it turns into money. That's the story of money.
Now, yeah. Well, when you were talking about tariffs, and I think you really explained it well in the book, you were talking about 2 bottles of wine. One was from France and was delicious and it was $20, and one was from California and was okay and it was also $20. And so you would prefer to buy the $20 bottle from France. But then they placed a tariff on the French wine. And that meant that the French now have to pay. Is that right? The French have to pay. No, that isn't what happens.
French are not paying anything. The French, we have some issues with the IRS right now in the United States, but the IRS is purely domestic. There's no IRS, Internal Revenue Service, in France. France sells the bottle of wine. Let's go through the mechanics of how a tariff works to the importer. The importer pays the French winery $20, and if it's a 30% tariff, pays a $6 tax to the U.S. government. It's the exporter who lays out the money. And you want to know something? This is very interesting, and I never thought about this until recently. We know with absolute certainty the French winery is not paying the tax, because when they declare the price paid at the U.S. port, that's the price upon which they put the tax. So we know the importers are still paying $20. They're not paying $14, not getting a discount to make up for the tax. We know that as a fact. So the French wineries, as a fact, whatever your political leanings, we have proof of this, are not paying the tariff. In fact, if you look at what's being paid by American importers for foreign goods, they've gone up by 1% in the last few months. So no, they're not paying. Again, if they were paying the tariffs, you'd see the discount there. There's no discount there. It's the importers that's paying the tax. So who is ultimately paying the tax? The importer bumps up the charge to the wholesaler, and the wholesaler bumps up the charge to you.
So the 2 bottles of wine now, you have one that's $26 instead of $20, the one that from France or so, something like that. And the American California wine is still $20. So that's good, because then people from California will buy the California wine. It'll be good for the United States to have local winery selling
No,
their, no.
that's not how it works. Put yourself in the shoes of the California winery.
Okay.
Your competition just had their price to the consumer increased to 26. Are you going to keep your price still at 20? No way. You could still, you were holding steady against the French winery when you had the same price. Now their price has gone up $6. You could probably raise your price to $25 and be more competitive than you were before the whole tariff regime.
So the tariff is going to make prices go up on domestic products as well as imported products.
Again, you don't need some fancy mathematical equation to figure this out. It's really common sense. Put yourself in the shoes of the California winery. Their competition's price just went up by 30%. It's a no-brainer for them to raise. Maybe there might be a few oddballs out there who said, well, we can raise our price, but we won't. We could raise our price and still have the same number of customers, but we won't. I don't think too many businessmen stay in business long term if that's their philosophy.
Well, let me ask you this, Howard, Yaruss. Don't you think, I mean, you are, yes, you're a lawyer and a professor and all that, but President Trump, he's a billionaire. He must know better than you. What makes you think that you know as much as President Donald J. Trump about tariffs?
Because it's not a question of who says something which makes an idea right. It's whether it makes sense. It doesn't matter, and I make this point emphatically in the book, whether an idea comes from the left or the right or the middle or wherever we're on the spectrum, or if there still is a spectrum intact, it matters whether it makes sense. And raising prices for consumers, yes, it makes sense for some people. Who does it make sense for? Billionaires, and I'll tell you why. Who spends a lot of their income buying stuff? Buying goods that are subject to tax, lower income people. Do you really think Donald Trump or Bill Gates spends a large portion of their income on stuff that's like at the supermarket that's taxed? No, it's a regressive tax. It's a tax that's primarily paid by people on the lower part of the income spectrum. Someone earning $50,000 a year spends all their money. They don't save a lot of money. They don't invest in all sorts of stuff. They're buying stuff subject to the tax. Someone with $1 billion is spending, they're spending more than the $50,000 a year person, but still it's a very small percentage of their income that's being spent on goods that's subject to this tax. So it's a way to help fund the tax cuts that the Congress recently enacted, which the income tax cuts, which primarily benefit wealthy people. Income taxes going down, tax on stuff you buy going up. It's a way to fund that. And yes, this is the whole point. It's not a question of right or wrong. It's a value judgment. If you think shifting our tax burden down the economic spectrum makes sense, fine. I'm not telling you it's right or wrong. There is no right or wrong. It's a value judgment. And we elected someone who had that value and he's implementing it. You like it? Fine. You don't like it? Vote for someone else next time.
All right. Give us a definition so we can continue with everybody understanding, even people like me, about regressive versus progressive tax.
Okay, that's a term that people with a lot of knowledge in this area throw around that really is important to understand. If there's a sales tax on goods, and I'm just trying to make it simple, and someone on the lower end of the economic spectrum spends all their money on goods, 10% of their money, 10% of their income is going in taxes. Do you see that? So in other words, if you earn $50,000 a year and you spend $50,000 a year on goods, and there's a 10% tax in it, $5,000 is going away in taxes. 10% of your income is going away in taxes. If you're earning $1 billion a year and you spend $1 million a year on goods, yes, you're paying more in taxes, but as a percentage of your income, it's much, much lower. The lower income guy is spending 5% of their income on taxes. The billionaire is spending significantly less than 1% of their income in taxes because most of their income they don't spend, they put into investments. So a regressive tax is a tax that disproportionately hits lower income people. The lower the income you are, the higher percentage of your income that gets caught up in that tax. Does that make sense?
It makes terrible, horrible sense, yes. So do you think that there should be, I know you talked about, all right, let me ask you this. You have this section in your book where you talk about a community of homes, and they all make, say, $50,000 a year. That would be a good thing, as opposed to a community where you have some people making 50,000, but a bunch of people who have $1 billion. That's bad.
Well, I try to talk about income inequality seems like a value judgment. By the way, there's some evidence that people wring their hands about the income inequality we have in America. There's a lot of evidence that people like it. What is the evidence? One, they voted for someone who clearly talked about a tax cut making income inequality greater. He was very clear about that. So that's point number one. Point number two is a sort of oblique point. Lotteries. Have you ever noticed that lottery jackpots? I saw one recently for $1 billion. Why do we have one winner with $1 billion as opposed to 1,000 winners with $1 million?
Yeah, why?
I would prefer a lottery where you have 1,000 times greater chance of winning $1 million than a 1,000th chance or less chance of getting $1 billion. But evidently, the people who put together lotteries have decided people would rather have one shot at $1 billion than 1,000 shots at $1 million. So there's some evidence that people are not troubled by income inequality. But here's the point I'd make. Again, it's a value judgment. There are some objective reasons why large income inequality is bad. One, look at history. Often leads to revolution and death. That's one pretty compelling reason. You could overlook that and say, and this is what you brought up from the book, you have a more efficient, vibrant economy when you have, I just hope I get the math right, 50 people earning $100,000 a year rather than one person earning $5 million and everyone else groveling for scraps. It's just more efficient because when people earn $100,000 a year, they spend a certain percentage on food, certain percentage of housing. Businesses can plan for what people need. When one person gets everything, everyone's just sitting around hungry, waiting for that person to decide to buy a new yacht. So it's just a more efficient, productive economy when there's more equality. And I would characterize that as more regularity and consistency of spending. That's an objective reason to promote more equal incomes. But again, it's mostly a value judgment, and I don't want to impose my value judgments on my readers or you or the people listening to this podcast.
Well, you can try. Howard Yaruss, do you think our founding fathers made some errors did they saw America as this infinite space, and that was wrong. It was a very finite space, as it turned out. Do you think they should have placed limits on ownership of land or wealth or that kind of thing?
No. The question is, why look back to 1776, the Revolution, or 1787, the Constitution? We have the right to do that today. We want to have a more equal distribution of income. It's just go to the tax code. It's a political choice. It's not something hardwired in the Constitution. It's not something that's a law of nature. It's just a political choice, and we can have whatever tax system we want. When Barack Obama was president, the top tax rate was 39.6%, and he was called the socialist. Do you know what the top tax rate was under Republican Dwight Eisenhower's administration was?
I only know because I read a book called Understandable Economics. It was like 91 or something.
91%.
Yeah.
So how is Barack Obama, a socialist, at 39.6% and Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican? It just shows how things have changed so radically in our country. But again, it's a purely political choice, but the founders gave us the tools to make that choice. That's the point I want to make. They couldn't have figured out in 1787, where 99% of Americans were farmers, what would work in 2025. We have to figure that out. And we've made a decision to have this big, beautiful bill. And that's the decision we've made. And this is my point. If you don't think it's a good decision, you need to get involved and promote a better one. But that's the decision the founders enabled us to make. Good for them.
But, all right, let me narrow it down. Let me ask you about immigration. You don't discuss that in your book, but I'm wondering about immigration in terms of the economy. Is there an economic crisis related to the billions of people who are flowing into our to the conservative point of view that there is a huge crisis in immigration? How do you think this?
Well, if you're a Native American, there is.
That's right.
In any event, is there a crisis? I don't see any. I haven't heard any evidence of any. It's just totally made up. They say there's a crisis, but what exactly is it? I'm not really sure. Immigrants do commit crimes, but the irony is they commit crimes statistically less frequently than native-born Americans. So it's not a crime problem. There's a crisis. They're always in a crisis. They have to set up a crisis to respond to. I don't see a crisis. Explain to me, and I'd like them to explain to me what is a crisis. And yes, Trump has $1 billion and I don't, but he still is living in the same world I am. He needs to explain to me exactly what this crisis is. I just don't see it. I wish I had a better answer for you.
No, that was the answer that I assumed you'd have. We're talking with Howard Yaruss. His book is called Understandable Economics, because understanding our economy is easier than you think and more important than you know. Howard Yaruss, we do have a kind of a minority rule in place in the United States of America. That is the number of there's the 50% of senators who represent the Republican Party represent far fewer people than the 50% who represent Democratic voters. Yeah.
That's where we get into the founders. I do think they, to use the hyper-technical term, screwed up when they did the electoral college as well as the allocation of votes in the Senate. There are calculations that each senator from Montana represents 1/35th the number of people that each senator from the state of California represents. And that's just not fair. We fought a revolution literally over that issue, taxation without adequate representation. So this is a vestige of what the founding fathers thought. And there is an expectation. I think if they came back today, the thing they would be most amazed by is not the Republican Democrat divide or the electoral college, that we're still talking about the Constitution in 2025. One of them explicitly said that it needs to be rewritten every 20 years. I think they would be amazed that it's still in place. And so what worked in 1787 clearly is some of it is problematic in 2025. And we have the ability to amend the Constitution, but that is so cumbersome and so difficult. You need 3/4 of the states. So basically 1/4 of the states. And when you have states like West Virginia or Montana, I don't know what percentage of Americans that is, but I would assume it's less than 10% have a veto over changing the Constitution. So we have this somewhat non-democratic or undemocratic way of governing our nation. It's obviously like the House of Representatives has a strong linkage to population, although there are some states that are trying to change that now. But in any event, the point is that we are saddled with that somewhat undemocratic system that's causing a lot of dysfunction these days. So yes, it's a problem. And it's the problem was not with the tax issues. The founders left that to us to decide. The founders saddled us with this structure of how the democracy works. And that structure is really causing difficulties today.
But you advocate activism in a way that is going to make things different. But how will activism make a difference if there's Montana?
Got to speak to those Montanans. It's clearly the system puts too much power in rural people or certain states that have lower populations. And the Constitution has provided a framework for the greatest nation literally in the history of the world. To throw it out would be very, very chaotic, to say the least. So you have to work within the imperfect system that we have. And so you really have to, I don't see another alternative to it. You really have to twist the arm and persuade those people that certain policies are not in their best interest. And you need, I'll get right down to brass tacks. You need Democrats to clearly stand up and explain exactly why Trump's policies are hurting them, and explaining which policies we have that will benefit them. A friend of mine wrote an op-ed in the Times that was there yesterday, and it ended with, you can't run for office only pointing out your opponent's flaws if your flaws are even worse. So you need something positive, something that people will resonate with people. And I live in New York City, and there's someone running for mayor. I don't know if you've read about it, Zoran Mandami, who is a 33-year-old state assembly person with basically no history in government or governing other than that stint in the state legislature. He just has sparked this interest on a lot of people in a more proactive, more optimistic government. And he's getting a lot of mileage out of that. He may be the next mayor as a result. And so people need a positive message. They don't need someone who is just criticizing the other side. And I think that's really the problem.
You just said something interesting. You said he may be the next mayor. In the past, if a person won the Democratic primary for mayor, they're essentially mayor. But you don't think that's the case this time?
Lindsay, I'm talking Republican mayors during my lifetime. Bloomberg, no. A lot of people have this impression of New York City as some kind of socialist, communist bastion. It's really not. It's a very diverse city, and there are all sorts of people here. But New York City has had its fair share of Republican mayors. I once did the math at one point in my life and realized that someone other than a Democrat was in the mayor's office during half of my lifetime. I don't think that's true anymore. But my point is still valid, that it's not an automatic shoo-in if you're a Democrat running in New York. For a good portion of my life, it hasn't been a Democrat sitting in the mayor's office.
Right. I'm definitely curious to see how that's going to turn out. I think everybody's watching that one.
It's fascinating.
Truly. Talk a little bit about the. I'm trying to think about how you phrase it in your book about workers versus the money that you earn when you're working is salary, so you have to pay more than money you earn from investment.
Yeah, this is something, it makes my head want to explode that people don't know this. Warren Buffett famously said, Warren Buffett For those of you who don't know, he is one of the 5 richest men in the United States. He has a fortune of about, I don't know, $100 billion. And he makes the point that he pays a lower tax rate than his secretary. And now I will explain to you how that happens. It's very simple. All income, every last dollar of income comes in one of 2 flavors: work income, investment income. Every dollar of income, work income, and investment income. And here's the fact. Whether you think facts have a liberal bias or not, doesn't matter here. These are the facts. Work income is generally taxed at a higher percentage rate than investment income. What does that mean? If you earn $100,000 a year, you pay a larger percentage of that $100,000 to the government in taxes than if you get $100,000 of investment income. If you get $100,000 of investment income, you pay a lower percentage of the $100,000 than you would have had that $100,000 been earned from a job. It's just a fact. And I think if more people knew about that, that may no longer be a fact. But again, that's the way our tax system works.
And that's capital
income,
gains.
A dollar earned from an investment is taxed at a lower rate than a dollar earned from your job. That's the simplest way I could say it.
And that's capital gains, right?
Capital gains, because investment income is called capital gains and is taxed at a lower rate. The 50,000-page U.S. tax code has a lower rate for that kind of income. And you could well imagine that the other 49,999 pages also have some benefits for which disproportionately go to people at the higher end of the income spectrum.
Okay, so a bunch of things pop into my head about this. You were talking about how, you want to have an informed electorate so that they know who to vote for and why. But the highest income level in America, for whom it is in their interest to keep things going in the way they're going, are the people who control the media, which supposedly has a liberal bias, but especially social media like Twitter and so on. And that apparently had a huge impact from 2016 on to who we vote for and why.
Yeah, and there are a lot of accounts that may be linked to foreign agents that benefit from sowing dissension in our country. So that's why people have to be. This is precisely the whole point of my book and the whole point of everything I've done. And that's why people have to be involved. I always make the point. I went to public high school in New York City, and we were not required to take a course in economics or finance, but we were required to take a course in trigonometry.
That's come in very handy, hasn't it?
Yeah. And then you get to college, and the minority of people in college do take a course, a certain percentage, a reasonable percentage, certainly not a majority, of people in college take a course in economics. And the professor, did you ever take one, by the way?
No.
Okay. And the professor, I'll tell you what would have happened. Right. Will put on the board all sorts of formulas, all sorts of jargon, graphs, technical language, and you'll walk out thinking, I really don't understand the world any better than I did before I walked in. So the goal is to not intimidate people, to not alienate people, to get people involved in these issues, because I've said this so many times, if they're not involved in the issues, they may get outcomes they really don't like. And that's the only way you're going to get it right, is by getting involved in these issues, asserting your values, figure out who's running for office that promotes those values, and get involved.
Well, Howard Yaruss, one of the things that you do in your book is you have these quotations at the beginning of each chapter, and those quotations are amusing and also depressing. That is, that a lot of the problems that we face in our economy every day apparently date back to ancient times, because you quote very familiar sounding things that were said by people long ago. So that's good to know. All right, well, it's always been this way. But it's also really depressing to think that it's always been this way.
There'll always be competition for who gets what. And you just can't say, well, I guess the decisions regarding that will be made in my best interest if I just don't get involved. And I think that's, or you have a demagogue come along and mislead people to think that he or she is watching out for their interest when behind the scenes, all they're doing is grabbing anything that's not nailed down.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about politics, because you spend some time talking in the book about the differences between socialism, communism, and capitalism. And that is a sort of aside from Democrats and Republicans, or is it?
Well, before the recent era, Republicans were generally more associated with a free market. In other words, less regulation, and Democrats were more associated with more regulation. As far as I can tell, that's totally broken down. Trump seems to be everywhere, taking stakes in companies, shaking down universities. He seems to be extremely involved in the private sector. Zoran Mandami here in New York talks about setting up supermarkets. So this divide on how much latitude is given the free market is sort of broken down. So it's hard to say. It's hard to come up with a characterization of what these different terms stand for, which is why I say in the book, all these isms are sort of useless in trying to understand what's going on in the economy. What's going on in the economy? Every country from America to North Korea has a certain amount of freedom to do what you want to do to earn a living. And it's a question of how much freedom you have. Traditionally in America, you had more. Traditionally in North Korea, you had less. But there's a lot of nuance to that.
Well, what about I was hearing in the news that there's that the president of the United States is using economic sanctions to influence foreign elections and trials.
Well, the United States has a long history of trying to influence the governments of other nations, and I think most of it has ended very poorly. So I can't defend the current economic policy. I know that, for instance, the New York Times has reported, and I'm smiling as I say this, that the 50% tariffs on India are presumably due to Modi is the leader of India, not nominating Donald Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. So that's how they purportedly wound up with a 50% tariff on their goods. We'll see what happens on October 14th, because if they have to refund the tariffs, I don't even know what that means. And the Treasury Secretary, Bessent, has said that the tariffs, having the court reverse the tariffs, would be embarrassing. I don't know of any bank robber that has said, well, if I have to return the money, it's too embarrassing. So you can't make me do it. I don't know what's going to happen. This is really an unprecedented time in U.S. history, is what I'm trying to get to. And so I wouldn't say all bets are off, but a lot of bets are off. And so it's hard to say how this is going to play out.
All right. Well, help me with the tariff thing again, then. So based on what you were saying about the tariffs earlier, it shouldn't affect the country that is getting the tariffs, because it really affects the people in America who are buying.
It greatly affects it, because suddenly that French wine, to use that example, becomes much less competitive. Even if the California winery increases their prices to $24, they're gaining a lot of the customers, because they were at a certain percentage of the market when they're both at 20. When the French wine's at 26 and the California wine's at 24, presumably they would increase their market share. So the French winery is, again, I'll use that technical term, screwed.
Right. Oh, I see. Okay. So they can sell to other countries, but they just can't sell like they were selling here. So
correct. Well, they always were able to sell to other countries. This only affects their sales to the United States, which for a lot of countries is a large portion of their exports.
So for a 50% tax on India would have a bad effect on us as consumers of products from India, which I don't know what those products are. And it would have a worse effect on India because they wouldn't sell whatever those products are?
I don't know worse, but suddenly there'd be much less demand for whatever goods are being made in India, that the United States would shift to buy those goods from other countries with lower tariffs or from domestic manufacturers. It's unlikely they're buying it from domestic manufacturers because goods made in India are made with labor that's so much cheaper that even with a 50% tariff, it's unlikely American-made goods would compete with it. My speculation is they'd probably wind up buying goods from Cambodia or somewhere else. In any event, India's economy would be hurt, would have fewer jobs.
I don't know if this is outside your realm of expertise, but I don't think anything is. So let me ask you about this. So during the second Trump administration, they have closed down in the name of waste and whatever those other terms are, that they're excess, whatever those things are. They've closed down all kinds of medical research, fired medical researchers, barred them from their research, and destroyed the research animals that they were working on. These are things like cures for cancer and Alzheimer's. Now, wouldn't those things boost the economy to be the country that has discovered those cures? And why would it be in anyone's interest? Why would it be in anyone's interest economically to close down that kind of research?
Well, the answer they would give is anti-Semitism.
Yeah, tell us about how that affects it.
A lot of this high-level research is done at America's most prestigious universities, and they've accused America's most prestigious universities of engaging in anti-Semitism, and therefore they have to cut back on cancer research, mRNA vaccines, and all this other stuff to punish them.
Because they're anti-Semitic, because the universities are anti-Semitic.
Well,
according to the...
It's kind of an irony that the Jewish presidents of some of these universities have to meet with some of Trump's minions and
defend why they're not
anti-Semitic. So yes, it's anti-Semitism, which needs to be stamped out. And what we're doing it through cutting cancer research and vaccine research. Again, people need to be involved in these decisions. And if they think it makes sense, fine. There are people who make sense. I will go out on a limb here and try to make sense of that anti-Semitism argument. The only way there have been anti-Semitic incidents at Columbia, at Harvard, and they feel the only way to get the attention of the administrators is to sock it to them financially. Well, I will go out on another limb here and say that's not my belief. I think there's a more subtle, more effective way to do it. But I do understand that some people may feel that way, that they feel you really need to hit them over the head because there were a couple of incidents or a few incidents or whatever that seemed anti-Semitic.
Let's get into a little history before we run out of time. You talked about in the era of Franklin Roosevelt, America became far more expansive in its government and its use of funds to put in social safety nets and deposit insurance and all those other things. And then when Ronald Reagan came along, that was reversed, and we've gradually been reversing it since then.
Yes.
Was America better off spending more money on social services than it is now when it's spending less?
Again, purely a value judgment. If you're a billionaire, I guess the feeling is the more money you have, the better. I don't know what Bill Gates or Donald Trump or any of these people want the extra money for, what they can't currently get with their own wealth that they need more wealth for. It's something that I just don't know what they have in mind. I think I'll speculate that the number in and of itself becomes the goal, that it's not about needing to buy something extra. It's about just having the number. In any event, if you're an average worker in a precarious position, yes, the safety net is great. If you're extremely well off, you can reach the conclusion, well, maybe some of my wealth shouldn't go to support that safety net. It comes down to how you view someone said where you stand on an issue depends where you sit. If you're sitting in the golden chair, it doesn't seem to be important or necessary. But if you're an average person, it does. But I'll go one step further. That's talking about narrow self-interest. You also need to think about what kind of society you live in. And that's an important consideration as well. And people should think that through as well when they think about which policies are best.
Do you think that the conservatives have played a long game, that is, by reducing the level of education in America by having lots of standardized tests and huge classes and fewer teachers and smaller pay for teachers and so on, and that's produced an electorate that doesn't know anything, and therefore they don't know what Howard Yaruss could tell them in his book, and therefore they vote out of their best interest?
Well, I get reviews from the students, anonymous reviews at the end of each semester, and I had a criticism that I am going to frame. It's complained that I made them think critically as opposed to just repeating the material. That was the criticism. And I think a lot of education is designed to make students sort of memorize things in a rote way. And the point I make is they will never be as good at regurgitating material as the internet. They nor I will be that good. And now AI is posing an even greater threat. So the only way to really add value is to think. And I think that's something that is really not as much of a priority as it should be in today's educational system. And that has to be made a priority. Again, it's more difficult to achieve. It's more difficult to teach. It's more difficult to measure, which is a really important consideration for most departments of education. But it is the most important thing. And it's a pity it's not stressed more.
Well, in education, for instance, we've seen the pendulum swing back and forth, and there was a time when education became more liberal, and there was lots of critical thinking and far less standardized testing, and now the pendulum has swung the other way. And in government, that's obviously there's been a swinging of the pendulum as well. I mean, we had Barack Obama, and now we have Donald Trump. Do you think that there's a chance that now that they have the pendulum in their court, that they'll just hold on to it, that it won't ever swing back?
Well, it's unfortunately the pendulum never seems to land in the middle, but throughout our history, the pendulum has swung both ways, and the democracy in theory has a self-correcting mechanism. And the question is that mechanism being dismantled as we speak? And I hate to say this, but only time will tell. I don't think anyone could say definitively it's going to hold or it's not going to hold, but it literally is unprecedented. There has, to my knowledge, been no one in American history that has tried to dismantle the mechanics of democracy the way it's happening now. And that's very sad to see. And whether it'll be successful or not, again, I have no idea.
And it happens, it's been happening like hourly. So by the time people hear this interview that we're recording, things could have changed radically.
Right. And the big test, I think, is going to come next November when the midterm elections happen, or should happen.
Right.
And
it should happen.
We'll see what happens then. That's really going to be a test of the system, and my fingers are crossed.
If they don't let the elections happen, which is, I think, what they're working towards, that would be a disaster.
Or there's something that people call competitive authoritarianism. They have elections in Russia. They have elections in Turkey. They
don't mean anything.
Not real elections.
Yeah.
The fix is in. They're sham elections. So you can have the veneer of an election. You can have an election, but if it's fixed, it's not real. So I don't know what's going to happen. Will we have an election? Will we have a fixed election? Will we have a fair election in which some opposition to the current administration wins? Or will we have a fair election in which this is possible? There's an endorsement of the current administration. Those are 4 possible outcomes, and I'm sure there are other ones as well. So it'll be fascinating to watch.
There's a big difference, I think, between knowing stuff and knowing where to find it. And I'm in favor of knowing stuff. And if you want to know a lot more than you know right now, I recommend that you read this book, Understandable Economics, because understanding our economy is easier than you think and more important than you know. And the author, my guest, the brilliant Howard Yaruss, thank you for spending some time with us on From the Bookshelf.
Oh, thanks. This was great. I really enjoyed it.
That's it for this week's From the Bookshelf. I hope you enjoyed the program and will come back and see us again next time. In the meantime, you can check out our website at FromTheBookshelf.com. You can subscribe to our podcast wherever you subscribe to podcasts. You can even get your smart speaker to play From the Bookshelf by saying, "Alexa, play Gary Shapiro's From the Bookshelf." And she will. Until next time, for From the Bookshelf, I'm Gary Shapiro. Take care. See you soon.